now we are moving into our second plenary session, economy-wide transition for green development. I would welcome Sri Ravi Pandit, chair of the session, on the stage. Mr. Pandit is a board member of WRI-India and co-founder of group chairman of KPIT Technologies and KNP Group. Ravi is also co-founder of Javani, a charitable public trust aimed at making the city of Pune the most livable city in India. He is very passionate about environment, technology, and social policy leading towards a more sustainable world. Welcome. I would like to call Mr. M. Anil Kumar, Mayor of my city, Kochi, a lawyer by profession. Anil Kumar has 30 years of experience in the public realm. He debuted as a councillor at the very young age of 25, and now taking up as working as a city administration head. He has taken a lot of new challenges and responsibilities, and he's going to share his views with us today. Now I'll call Melissa, Director, US International Engagement, World Resource Institute. Mary Gogri, Head of Corporate Strategy, RD Industries Limited. Dr. Ila Patnaik, Chief Economist, Aditya Birla Group. Mr. Ajay Kumar Rastogi, Chairman, Task Force of Sustainable Just Transition and Green Hydrogen, Government of Jharkhand. Samir Sisodia, CEO, Rain Matter Foundation.
So I think this is going to be really like the crux of this two-day conference. You know, the issues that we are looking at is how do you ensure that the growth in economy and the protection of ecology happens at the same time. You know, there is this apparent contradiction between the two. For example, and the earlier speakers in the first plenary session talked about how low energy consumption in India today. How many people are still below the poverty line in India? And we have, of course, a commitment to increase their standard of living. But increasing standard of living necessarily calls for consumption of more energy, consumption of more materials, and that can possibly be to the detriment of environment. The issue is, how do we really marry these two things together? How do we make economy-wide transition or transformation possible? What levers do we use for making that happen? Because it's too late not to ignore ecology, but it's also too late not to improve the living conditions of people. And I think it's important to bring these two things together at this point in time. The whole thrust of WRI's conference here is about people, nature, and climate. That's what seeks to bring all these three things together. And we have today really an exceptionally good panel to talk about it, because we have people who come from industry, people who come from administration, people who come from politics, from philanthropy, and from science and technology. We really have a full range of people talking to us today, and it's going to be an exceptionally good conversation, I'm sure. So I'm going to request each panel member to come up and speak 4 minutes or 5 minutes to give their thoughts, and then we will have some time for questions for them. Over to you. Who is the first speaker?
I represent state government, Jharkhand state government, and I am the chairman for the Task Force of Sustainable Just Transition. See, why transition matters for Jharkhand and why transition matters for India, that is very important. When we look at the economy, and if we have to be self-reliant, either at national level or at sub-national level, you have to be reliant in your economy, and it should be mutually existence with environment friendly. How it can be mutually environment friendly? I'll focus on Jharkhand itself. When we take about Jharkhand, it is in the eastern India, and it is one of the most mineralized state. We have 40% mineral reserve of the country. On the other side, we have more than 33% forest. So the contradiction goes both ways. And how do we create a harmonized ecosystem over there. When we talk about energy, it's about we support 30% energy requirement, which is through coal. And one, if he has to move towards cleaner energy, then definitely there has to be transition. What it can bring to the state, how economic diversification is possible in the state, how it can be just, and how it can be equitable to the people of Jharkhand. So attaining net zero can only be achieved if we take it in totality. We should not talk only about phasing about fossil fuel. We should talk about energy security of the state. We should talk about decarbonizing the industry, how the new avenues can be built, how the land which is going to be vacant if it is not put to the mining, how it can be repurposed, how we can create greener job, because there will be migration, jobs will be less in a greener economy. So how we can create those opportunity in the state, that's going to be very, very important. And then creating a capacity, biggest questions comes in the sub-national level is the capacity and capability is the biggest challenge for the sub-national level. So how to motivate people, how to motivate bureaucrats and politicians to take a decision in favor of new economic development which is coming. And it is not very far off. When we are planning for 47 years down the line, it's not very far off. That planning we need to start right now. That is why we have started taking bottoms-up approach. We are trying to consult all stakeholders, whether it is a formal sector, whether it is an informal sector, whether it is industry, whether it is a service provider. So we need to talk everyone if we have to move away towards a better ecologically and sustainable living in the planet. And creating an alternative employment in the state is very important. You require skilling, reskilling and upskilling will be required. And how do you do it? You have to map. You have to meet the people's aspirations by mapping them, by reaching them, and try to find out what kind of a job potential will be there. So that is what we are trying to do. And second thing, if new economic development has to take place, state has to be secured from the energy front. If you look at today, our 98% energy requirement comes from the fossil fuel as compared to India, which is much lesser than that. So how do we migrate from fossil-based economy towards non-fossil-based economy? A lot of fallow lands will be there, and it is one of the most climatical vulnerable state in the country. The regions may be climatic factors, maybe edaphic factors, maybe mining, maybe many other factors there. So how to mitigate them, how to move towards a greener economy, that's a challenge. And that task force is trying to create a data, recommend to the government what kind of policy interventions will be looking. And I think that is going to be the biggest, it's not about 2 year or 5 year or 3 years approach. It's about a long approach. So what we are trying to focus is a short term and a medium term and long term approach, what we are planning to do. So I think this is in nutshell what we are trying to do from Jharkhand. And I'll be very happy after one, every panelist speaks about it. I'll be happy to answer if you have any specific query. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
As we think about the green energy transition and people, nature, and climate, one of the big questions that has been heard across every venue I've been in is how do we supply the minerals that we need in order to achieve a clean energy transition? Having worked in the United States and across the world within this sector, I've seen a lot of successes and failures within this space. I was asked to think about lessons learned that would be helpful as India seeks to scale up its critical minerals mining. from what I understand, which is not a deep understanding of the sector in India, but from what I do understand, it seems as though the legal and regulatory environment is already in place. You have the needed laws and regulations to ensure responsible mining. However, enforcement is lacking. And one thing I've seen across operations is that if there's not an enforcement mechanism, then oftentimes things will slip. So when I've been on sites that have had problems, for instance, I've seen regulators actually move inspectors out to a site who live there for extended periods of time to make sure that things are being done right. So if we want to talk about responsible mining, we need to think about enforcement. Also, I wanted to clarify the framing of this question. We think about sustainability and mining, and I think it's important to note that mining as an extractive industry is not sustainable. It is removing non-renewable resources from the ground. That being said, mining can be done in a way that supports sustainable development. And this is where relationships with our communities and our neighbors is so important. One thing that I have been given to understand is that right now mining operations in India do not have very strong dialogues going on with their neighboring communities. This is an area that I think is a challenge across the industry, but we're seeing really emerging best practices in this space. Either in the form of formalized community benefits agreements or just consistent dialogue. This dialogue should be happening at the beginning, at the planning stages of an operation, throughout the duration of the operation, and then really with an eye to post-closure land use. One thing that is clear is that to support the economy of countries where mining might be happening, it's important that the industry and the government supports downstream processing and education for communities. In conversations I've had in the last just few weeks, I have been really struck by how much of a focus is on how we impact communities, not just how we impact the environment. So there are, inherent impacts when you're digging things out of the ground, and you're going to impact biodiversity, you're going to create waste. But we can make different choices about how we impact our communities. Things that have worked well, I would say, really one of the challenges can be having clear permitting processes that really address how you get a mining license, but then also having this sort of permitting for your air quality and your water be regulated carefully. Another thing is financial assurance. One thing that is an issue in much of the world is that there's not sufficient financial assurance. In the developing world, it's even more challenging. We see that most financial assurance is done through bank guarantees. It's not just a company plunking down, hundreds of millions of dollars. There's a relationship with a bank. And from what I understand, that can be more challenging. We heard earlier about the rates to get loans in India being higher. So I do think that financial assurance is more of a challenge. But if we don't have it, we run the risk of abandoned mines, and with that, contamination that will affect people for generations potentially. The other thing that I would say is important is transparency. We heard talk about this in the last session about transparency and traceability. And this is something that is a challenge really across the world. How do we know that a company is actually behaving responsibly? There are a range of different standards that exist, and not all companies are using the same standards to talk about what they're doing. Further, there is, in some cases, no auditing that's happening with regard to these operations. So it's important that there is transparency. And the last piece is traceability. And this is where it's important as we want to improve battery production in all parts of the world and EV automobiles, that the OEMs have the ability to know where their products are coming from. So responsible sourcing is definitely identified as an issue. But in order to do that, we have to be able to follow the material from the mine through the refining, through the battery, and then to the companies. We're seeing movement around the world. The Global Battery Alliance is working on this. In Europe, they're working on battery regulations. So we're starting to see movement in this space. But if you want to ensure that we are transitioning in a way that is protective of our communities and our environment and has a lower greenhouse gas footprint, then traceability is another critical piece of the puzzle. The last thing I would say for India to think about is really having Indian companies engage internationally. There are international venues where these conversations are happening, and right now India is not at the table. So that's an area to come that I think would really help. The other thing is the use of tools, things like the integrated biodiversity assessment tool, which can help exploration and production companies look at what impacts they might have to biodiversity. The last two tools are WRI tools, Aqueduct, where companies can look at water stress in the environment where they're working to understand what the risks are, and then reporting their greenhouse gas footprints to the great GHG protocol. So I'd recommend those types of actions to be considered as we think about how to get the minerals that are needed for the transition and to do it responsibly. Thank you.
I am from the Aditya Birla Group, which produces cement, aluminum, some of the most hard to abate sectors. And I think, so I've been asked to speak about the challenges and government interventions for sectors like ours. To begin with, what is the biggest challenge? So let's take the question of aluminum. One of the biggest inputs into aluminum is electricity, because it uses the electrolysis process. If the national grid, say in France, provides an aluminum plant electricity in France, then, and it comes from nuclear energy, or if a national grid anywhere else provides hydel power, then it does not have high CO2 emissions. Whereas in India, either electricity comes from the grid, where it is thermal, largely, so 70%, say thermal power, then this is a sector that produces CO2, has high CO2 emissions. Similarly, if actually, so I'm taking the case of aluminum to kind of convey the challenges. So aluminum needs 24/7 electricity. You can't shut the plant down tonight, start it tomorrow morning. It takes, technically that's not feasibly possible. So if you are to keep a continuous flow of electricity going to the plant, and the state grids are not dependable, and the national grid maybe can't even be reached because many times the plants are near mines, then what happens is that you have captive power, and captive power typically is in India coal-based. So then the challenge is, can you move from coal-based captive power to renewables? And that again brings you to the challenge of the cost of storage. And at present levels of technology, the cost of storage is very high. So the biggest challenge then is, how is this transition to low emissions being made if we continue to depend on either thermal power from the grid or on coal-based technologies until battery storage becomes cheaper and we can depend on it? So there is, all these, I'm an economist, not an engineer, and all these engineers in the company tell me about the losses that happen when you do lift storage, they pump up water and then they bring it down, so that stores power. So I'm sure many of you are engineers, so I'm not going to even venture into that space. But fundamentally, I see the problem as the power sector, first big issue as the power sector being able to solve its issues. How is the power sector going to move to renewable? Are we going to do more hydel? But that has its own challenges, social, environmental, and so on. Are we going to move to nuclear? Well, maybe. I think there was hope many years ago that we are going to move to nuclear power a lot more when the nuclear deal was signed. Currently, I don't hear much about it. And then there is solar and wind, which we are trying, but as I said, it's an expensive proposition. So, from the challenges, I think the next question I was asked to talk about was what are the government interventions that we would like to see? And so, first, of course, being please, can we have renewable power in the grid 24/7, like, say, Europe will? The second sort of intervention would be in terms of taxes. So, as you're aware, Europe has come up with the carbon border adjustment mechanism, so that they have an ETS mechanism internally, and so that carbon leakage doesn't happen. Any imports that go into Europe also have to either pay a tax, which is as e-certs that the importer will buy, or they can be offset if the domestic country has a carbon tax. Now, we pay coal cess, electricity duties, etc., etc. Coal cess, for example, could easily be converted into a tax based on CO2 emissions. So it doesn't even particularly increase our burden, but it does fit into the mechanism that would otherwise have us pay not just a coal cess domestically, but additional taxes to the EU. And what I find most ironic about this mechanism, and if we don't do this, is that while on the one hand we talk about the trillion dollars that advanced economies have to transfer to developing and poor countries in order for our climate transition to happen. Instead of that, here we will be paying a tax to Europe. So surely the governments need to wake up, and we need to keep this money at home and see how this conversion of these various electricity duties, coal cesses, fuel taxes, which are primarily taxes on carbon, can be converted into a CO2 based tax, so that we don't have to pay additional taxes. The other area in which we would like to see government intervention is in the regulatory space. So what Melissa spoke about, traceability and transparency, is something that then a whole regulatory system has to create. And while we've come up with a new law on carbon markets, but there is a whole system that will need to come with it, of verifiers, of auditors, of the market infrastructure that will go with it. And that is something that needs to develop, and we feel that it needs to develop fast, because though our commitments are 2070, but I think for all practical purposes, if EU election goes the way next year it might go, and if EU does continue with the CBAM and sticks to 2034, then we would need to move towards 2034 much faster, and we can't afford to wait for 2070. If I look at competitors, at least for our sectors, like China, they're already creating these mechanisms. They're not going to the WTO and saying that, oh, we don't want the CBAM. Instead, they're creating mechanisms which would give them these offsets. So I'll stop there. I think I've exceeded my time. Thank you very much.
Now we are talking about development and then we are talking about economic development, and then we are now thinking about what can be done to the ecology. No, actually, it should not have been like this, because this is the focal point, I believe. Because, see, I come from Kerala, which has a beautiful climate actually, which has its topography like anything. You have the Western Ghats, which is so precious, and you also have the southwest monsoon. But we had the floods 2 or 3 years back. It was creating so much havoc for us. So ecologically also we are very fragile. But now she was telling that I was a counselor at the young age. Even now I am very young. So when I was in my childhood days, I still used to see, because Kerala was On the GDP front, we was very low. Our GDP was very low. Our per capita income was low. But we were having very happy times with the agriculture economy. Now suddenly after 1990s, with our high education, people started going out. They started bringing, non-resident Indians started bringing money to us after the Gulf boom and all that, oil boom and all that, problems started creating. So, see, my question is very specific as a political worker. I'm very different from everyone is different for that matter. But I am only an ordinary political worker. She was telling that she is not an engineer. I'm not total anything, not even in economics like you. I'm a common man. So the question from the part of the common man is that, see, when you had an agriculture economy and you could solve all these issues, then how come with all this capitalism in its booms and with all these inventions and with all this patenting, why are you so worried about ecology now? Actually, you are thinking about sustainable development. Why should we have another word called sustainable development? Why can't we have development per se? Now we are speaking about development and then we are telling about sustainable development. Actually, it should have been the other way around. If it is development, it should be sustainable, because without ecology, how are you going to have this development after all? So my first point, my focal point is that, see, these are not two different things. We should not actually start speaking about the dichotomy of these two jargons. Actually, it should go along together. I told you about even Kochi, since she was also introducing that I am the mayor of her city. It actually makes me tense. So Kochi has its, again, this flash floods. We have this canal system, big canal systems we have, but the canals, sometimes they become clogged. Everything is happening because of the consumerist lifestyle that is happening. Everything is happening. So what is the answer? So these are the challenges. I would say that why can't we have, instead of first building a grey infrastructure, instead of building, I heard once Mr. K.T. Ravindran speak in one of the seminars, the opening seminars. So he was telling that don't start widening your roads. I don't know whether Toyota is listening to whatever I am saying. So he was telling that don't widen your roads, don't build flyovers, because the more flyovers you build, you will bring more vehicles into it. So let it be narrow, let the roads be narrow. You think about an alternative system. So I'm not like that, because I also want Toyota also to be on the roads, because I am on, always I ride this as a mayor, and all the official vehicles are manufactured by you. So I can't leave you. So my point is that instead of that, you should actually have a blue-green infrastructure, because during our early times we had this. Nobody used to speak about this. Nobody used to come and sit in Delhi. The farmers never used to come and sit in Delhi with all these codes. They used it. They practically did all these things. So why can't we think of these things? When we talk of development, why can't you have this type of development? This is the second point I am putting forward. Now the third point I want to tell is that, see, you should always take the people into confidence. We are sitting in a closed room discussing about many things. If you can't make people understand about all these things, what is going to happen? You are addressing only to a very small audience. So that is why I feel that the biggest challenge is to take people on board. So this is the biggest thing. And taking people into board, I would say it is not only the politicians. Our government secretary was telling about taking the politicians into policies should be proper. These are there because they are the leaders, of course. But after all, it is the question of ordinary layman on the ground. They should be taken into confidence. So that is again another challenge and another answer also, I feel. Each challenge gives you an answer also. Every challenge is an opportunity, you tell. So that's how things should go, I feel. So there should be a proper internalization of all these things, because the people should know that you should have an alternate way of life. Only then you can solve this problem of ecology and development. So that internalization, I'm not going into the details, because since she spoke just before me, I'm always so anxious about the time constraints. So internalization is also something which is so important. This is my next point. And policies, of course, policies are so important. I feel that the private sector is bound to do certain things. I am going to be very straight and flat. I need not pamper you. The private sector has made profits. It has grown like anything. Your profits have become super profits. and now she wants no other tax to be levied on her. I would say that it is not the question of taxing. It is not only the question of Godrej has grown like anything, Aditya Birla has grown like anything. So it is up to you also to answer these challenges. So the private sector, no, see, Toyota has done the neighbor, they are now starting the neighborhood, the cities challenge. So we should have such challenges. You should have CSR from the private sector. And I would say that the West is also answerable. Why are you leaving the West like that? Because they have developed, they have taken all the spaces in the whole universe. They have lived the way they want, and suddenly they are coming back and advising us, you do this, you do that. They are advising us. Why are you not clapping loudly? This is the problem of Indians. See, this is a point I feel that we should be very smartly putting. It is our right, yeah. It is our right. All of us are humans. So I feel that she was telling who is going to fund the technology. No. Sorry, since she is sitting by my side, I am so close to her. She was telling, see, who is going to fund the technology? Who is going to do this? Now the West is bound to do that. They are bound to do that. So with all the intellectual property rights, with all the patenting they have done, with all the profits they have made, now it is a time to give it back. So I feel that if all this happens, then I think it can be done. The transition period can be much more easily be done. And the government funding, you have the smart cities. But I am also running a smart city, but I don't think that the smart city had this as an integral part. I think the smart city missed it. The ecology sensitiveness of the whole project was not there. So as the government secretary, respected government secretary was telling, the government policies should also be like that. So this is another thing. So I've run out of time. Thank you. So I think this is how the economy can move forward.
I think Anil said a lot of things I wanted to say. I'm Samir from the Rainmatter Foundation. We are a young foundation. We've been chasing the climate problem for 2.5 years. We hit the energy and mobility transition when we started doing this. That was the main conversation that we found everywhere. Within a very short span of time, it became very evident that this is an everything, everywhere, all at once problem. This is not restricted to energy. It's not restricted to just carbon. There are 350,000 different what we call novel materials in science that we inject into the biosphere, which all represent millennia of evolution that's all happened at once, right? And we are unable to catch up with it for the rest of the ecosystem and biosphere. So it is a problem that needs to be, climate is a bad byproduct of a lot of bad trade-offs we make on a daily basis. The room where we are sitting has like 100 bad trade-offs that I can see right now, right? We are facing, so one interesting thing about this problem, especially since 2022, and now in 2023, especially in Delhi right now, that it's not a generational problem anymore. It is a civilizational problem. What I mean by that is we cannot solve it through the frames of thinking that we arrived at over the last 50, 70, 100, 200 years. This is a threat. It's not something our civilization has actually seen. It's a threat and a problem of a magnitude that our species has not faced. Our biology doesn't understand this problem, right? Like there are enough threats in there that we do not have answers to in our evolution, right? We're not really seeing this at this point of time. But since 22, it started to grow quite dramatically, right? And it's hitting home now. So, like Anil said, I don't think we have the luxury to have these debates of ecology versus economy. I mean, it's not a question of balance anymore. We went to the other side far long ago, right? So, the construct of our economy, the construct of how we run these things, the need for that amount of cement and aluminum in our construction and in our everyday lives, I think we got to start questioning all of this. The biggest question in energy that we are facing right now, and we are struggling how to answer this inside the foundation, is not about the source of energy. It's about the need for the kind of energy we use today. Apples travel from Northern Europe to South Africa to get polished and waxed, get back to Tesco shelves. You really want to power that with renewable energy, right? There are a dozen examples I can quote just off the top of my head, and we can keep digging into it. The construction and design of this room, it's fairly bright outside. It needs a little bit of air conditioning because I'm from Bangalore and this is Delhi. But it definitely doesn't need the kind of energy we are consuming right now sitting here in this room. It's in our designs, it's in our architecture, it's in the materials we consume. It's in everything that we do, right? If you're not going to solve it by just tinkering at the edges, just adding a little green tinge to the same economy, to the same design, to the same constructs that we've invented. We've got to look hard at this. And part of the answer is in agriculture, because it's a system that evolved for 10,000 years. Ever since we started tilling, we actually started causing damage. So there are better answers to that as well. But we definitely have to find our answers in biology, in ecology, and less in mining. That's a given. If we can't extend our imaginations into that, and as for the question of developmental pathways, the fact that a lot of people still need to be brought out of poverty and so on and so forth. So at the foundation, we have this chase around what we're calling sense of the house and indicators. By one reckoning, and we can go into the depth of it later, 94% of India has lost on every parameter that you can put on paper that matters to them. Health and nutrition, their asset value. Their asset value has eroded 80 to 90% flat out. Soil carbon, the water table, biodiversity, the breadth of livelihoods in the village, on every parameter that you can imagine. Their asset value has eroded. If inflation adjusted incomes have gone up by, let's say, what, 10%? Is that a huge win? If 94% of our country actually lost because of the existing carbon budgets we are using, why are we asking for more? Like, can we imagine a different way to do this? Can we imagine a different way to get to these outcomes? So I think when we are looking at the green economy, so whose economy? What does green mean to it? I think these are deeper questions that we need to be asking before we just start jumping to applying band-aids of solutions on the same problems. Thank you.
So thank you so much. I think it's a pretty diverse panel. So I am the last speaker, so I'll add my touch to this. So I'm Mirik Gogri. I'm from RT Industries, but I think the hat that I wear here is our family office Spectrum Impact. Similar to Rain Matter, it's like a 3-year-old impact-focused family office with a disproportionate impact focus on climate. And so I come from a technical background and also from a sort of manufacturing background. So I have a sort of interesting perspective of some of the discussions that we had here. So our philosophy is that the total energy use, I think that's the very right. There is an interesting graph where energy is plotted against happiness, like per capita energy use versus happiness, and it sort of plateaus. So there is like it goes up till a certain point and then it plateaus. I think that is a good indication of where we should target. Like if you look at US on that graph, then the amount of energy usage is quite high. But again, happiness is subjective, but that's an interesting graph to look at. Having said that, there will be certain amount of energy from a low development country or developing country to go to reach like basic healthcare, basic education and things like that. So we look at it a very energy centric problem in our mindset. And coming from a technical background, we really are interested in finding global sort of leapfrogging solutions, as we like to call them, where the technology can play a disproportionate role. I think today we are talking about solar and how solar access is available. I go back to why solar energy is possible. It's because someone in the 1950s at Bell Labs did some work on silicon. So I think funding research is where we really want to focus some of the efforts, because that's an area which will give results in the long term. We are focusing on 2030 as a target for deploying so many things, but as many of the earlier people also mentioned, it's a longer game. It's like a marathon that we want to run at a speed of a sprint, and that's the very interesting problem statement, a very complicated problem statement that we are facing. How we like to look at things is, from a job creation perspective, we should look at leapfrog technology jobs. So there are going to be some few technologies that are going to come in the next 5 years, 7 years. Can we identify those technologies and create a upskilling of workers? Can we transition the economy in such a way that those upskilling cater to these new age technologies, which then cater to the green transition? And by this, I am not at all mentioning that we use energy as a free sort of commodity. I completely agree with the point that energy use itself, the conversion around amount of energy required, is sort of the central to the whole point of view. I also say that from a technical perspective, sometimes we also put a simple broad brush on solar. Let's put solar. Now let's go into slightly more detail. What are the technologies of solar? Technology itself is evolving so fast that if we invest in the wrong technology of solar, say if we invest in PERC instead of HGT right now, which is a more high-end technology, then we sort of are stuck. So let us be aware of the latest technological developments in a way. Let us be aware of the future bottlenecks which we cannot foresee. Silver consumption in solar panels is quite high. Now, if you look at the amount of solar panels you want to increase, say 5x, an interesting bottleneck comes up which we are not seeing now. So some of these things, if we are able to foresee, some of the byproducts of or second degree impacts of the green transition, if we are able to foresee, then I think that can cause a pretty good thing. Maybe I like to highlight a couple of things which actually is at an intersection of technology and the communities thing that we were discussing. There are technologies now called phytomining, where you actually use plants to mine old mines, which can act as remediation measures. Up and coming technology. Now imagine this technology is being deployed in Jharkhand, for example, where there are a lot of minerals. So I think we should not go on the camp that technology is sort of a thing that has created this mess. It has in certain extent, but it is also going to be a tool. It's how we use the tool that is an important factor. So I'll end at that. Thank you.
It's a scintillating session with people with different backgrounds making comments on different areas. So we have, as I said, administrators. We have an administrator from a state which is really trying to make a big impact on the fossil fuel consumption that has been there, international policy, economists, non-engineers and engineers, both, and philanthropist, and the common man. You know, our politicians are always the common man. So political leadership. So I was trying to just kind of look at some of the core things that are coming out of this discussion. I would like to talk a bit about that and then pose one question to all the panel members. See, the way we look at it is that today we are absolutely at an inflection point. It's not about our generation; it's about our species. No doubt about that. If we continue the way we are currently behaving, the world will continue, but humanity may not. That is the kind of problem that we should look at. And we should look at that problem not only from an ecology perspective, but also from a technology perspective. Some of you may have seen the interview of Hinton, who was Google's advisor on artificial intelligence. And he made a very striking statement. And he says, who knows, humanity may be just one step in the evolution of intelligence, and the intelligence tomorrow may not be biological. So look at that. Look at one situation where we say we are creating a world where humanity may not have a room to stay, and at the other end, where humanity need not exist because of the way technology is moving. So we are really looking at a situation where there is a paradigm shift and there is work for all of us to do. If I were to glean through the comments made by all, I think there are actions really required on 4 different things, and I'm summarizing what my panel members have spoken and maybe adding my bit to it. Clearly, a major social transformation cannot happen without social engagement. We cannot have a situation where somebody sits somewhere and comes up with change in the way in which we are living. So social engagement is extremely important, and the comment made by Mr. Anil Kumar is very critical, because we can't sit somewhere in an ivory tower and make a change in this. Luckily, we are in a country where the social commitment to a more balanced life is embedded in our blood. Luckily we are at such condition, and as we heard in the morning, we really score very low on energy consumption per head, but we don't score very badly on happiness. And that social engagement, that basic philosophy that we are a part of this overall nature, that this nature doesn't belong to us to plunder, and that we have to play only a role in that. I think that's an important part. So social engagement, social understanding of this is a very important part. To me, the second part is the part that Merrick talked about technology. It's my personal conviction that technology has an ability to solve most of our problems if we use it properly. We are talking about problems of energy. Maybe a few years down the line, we will keep on wondering, why did we use so much of coal? Why did we use so much of crude? Because maybe desktop fusion may become possible. Maybe it becomes possible to get hydrogen out of seawater. All these things are kind of just around the horizon, but that's an area that we really need to focus on. And our own experience is that new technology development is much easier, much lower costly, much faster in a country like India than in other countries. Because I think you can get good technology talent, hungry technology talent, young technology talent, which actually wants to make a difference in this field. So I have tremendous faith in the possibility of technology coming into this. There was talk about the role of private sector, both in India as well as abroad. And the fact that, the private sector has made money out of this whole thing, so they must put in money. I believe that there is a slightly different role for the private sector. I personally believe that can be the strongest agent of transformation if we can go to a stage where there is an economic case for this transformation. And I think it's possible to come up with an economic case. Can we bring down our capital cost of new technology? Can we bring down the operating cost of our new technology? If that be so, then this could be an economically viable solution. And if it is an economically viable solution, the private sector will engage very, very actively. And I think that's a problem that we need to address. Last and not the least is the whole issue of policy and regulation. There were a lot of comments about policy and regulation. You see, it's the job of the government to create an environment where people acting in their self-interest act in the interest of the world. An environment where the commons don't become so cheap that we will destroy them. I believe, in fact, if we are spoiling the air by having too much of CO2, we are actually spoiling the air commons, just as we have spoiled the commons in grazed land or in the water, etc., etc. So how do you create a policy framework where the commons are protected, and those who use those commons rather wastefully have to pay some price for it? How do we ensure that there is transparency in all these areas? So these are some of the things that come up from the discussions here. I must say that, all these panel members really brought out very different facets of a problem, which gives us tremendous hope that, sitting together, we can actually make a big difference. So there is one question that I have a common question for all of you. If you were a policy maker at whatever level, I personally believe that policy making doesn't happen only at the central government level. If you are the head of your family, you can decide the policy for your family. If you are the head of your housing society, you are the policy maker for your housing society. If you work in an industrial organization and you are a head of a department or the CEO of a company, you are a policy maker for that. If you are running a school, you are a policy maker for the school. So all of us are policy makers in our own right. I want to ask you, as a policy maker, what single policy that we will pursue to really make this transition to a green economy happen? Just one comment from each one of you, and then if you have time, I'll open the questions for the audience. Yeah.
What we can do for creating a greener economy by producing biofuel, how we can facilitate farmers, how we can facilitate the local communities to grow crops which can be a future for generating fuel. I think that's for Jharkhand is going to be the key sector because it has got water, we have got land, we have got everything. Only a conducive and technological intervention that there is a product and there is a buyer and value addition can take place.
All right. So I wear a lot of hats, but I only get to make one policy. That's challenging. Drawing on this idea that if we could incentivize industry, people to do things that are in their own interest, that are also in the common interest, as you said, I mean, that to me seems like an area where we are likely to be successful. So I would make policy that incentivizes the goals that we have, whether that's recycling or production of solar panels or having more public transit, whatever it is. There has to be government policy to incentivize corporates and individuals to take action that supports a livable future. Thanks.
So I think that the biggest problem is asymmetric information. I think eventually we all want to survive as a species, and it is this lack of understanding about what is happening. So the policy that I would really emphasize is disclosure. So whatever product you're making, right from the beginning to the end, you have to disclose the harm that you're causing in some ways or the other. I mean, the norms of disclosure we can discuss about, the standards of disclosure we can discuss about. But I think the most important policy in my framework would be that you make disclosures about what you're doing. Initially, they can be voluntary. Later, I would want them to be compulsory, mandatory, so that people know what harm you're doing. Thanks.
I simply want to reiterate what she says. This is the beauty. This is the beauty of the panel. Earlier, whenever I was referring to her name, everybody was laughing that I am telling something against her. But now I am always supporting her. And Mr. Ravi Pandit, the beauty of me being here is that you started the whole panel discussion as an international person, but now you have become a local person. So that's a big difference that has been there. See, I will more or less agree to what she was telling. From an industrial viewpoint, she was telling me. The answer is this: whatever policy you make sure that the policy is done for the betterment of the society. To know that the ecology should be there, the world should be there, the nature should be there, and human being is an integral part of the nature. Don't see nature and human being as two separate entities. If you do that, I believe that all our problems will be solved. Thank you.
Very difficult to boil it down to one policy, but I think my bias would be towards, pushing everything towards bioregionalism. Bioregionalism, because within your bioregion lie a lot of answers that are efficient, that are contextual to you, that make you resilient, and that have evolved over millennia. So biasing policies, biasing, it automatically lends to self-governance, and it automatically lends to more nuance. And there are better answers in there. So policies that support or reverse policies that negate bioregionalism.
Policies around funding of the first of a kind plants or projects, which can then be the basis of scalability, because once you get the matrix right at one place where the piloting is happening, any project, it can be a economical transformation or technology transformation, but funding many such experiments, and then the private sector, as you rightly mentioned, can then take it over, or a city where one is funded, then all other cities can take it over. But funding those initial experiments will be important.
So my name is Vijay. My question is like when there are so much competing interests, like politicians have their self-interest, industries have their self-interest. So within that, when we are talking or discussing everything, so I think the question is for whom? So it's my question is about citizen engagement. So how do we like ensure within our system, whether it's industry, whether it's the government, on different levels. So how do we ensure citizen participation, not just as a consultant, but also co-creation as well? So my question is how you're looking to that participation, like whether you're in industry, to ensure that civic participation is there in your policies when you are deciding what to do. So you are not just competing for your own interest, but broader the interest of the people. So that's my question to whoever wants to answer. Yeah.
This is the problem. Actually, everybody should answer about that. See, citizen engagement, I believe that citizen engagement is should be there. Now, self-interest. See, all the politicians are elected by the people. So, but we, again, just like I was telling about development and ecology, now you are telling about electing people and then asking them to have citizen engagement. You are electing someone because you believe that they will be engaging you, but you are going the other way around. So citizen engagement, I would say that we have many other, see, in Kerala you have our own options, like when we started our constitutional amendment and when we started our municipal act and all that, we made it a point to see that there will be neighborhood groups, there will be ward sabhas, you will go and discuss all these things in the ward sabhas and all that. But the problem is that the ward sabhas are not functioning in the way that we wanted earlier, because people are moving out. They are simply coming as such to collect the freebies or something. So that is why I told that there should be a internalization process also with it. So to have a proper civic engagement, I would answer you telling that our democracy should become more mature. It should become more meaningful. So if it has to do with everyone. The politicians are bound to do that. The bureaucrats are bound to do that. Even the private industry is also bound to do that. The media is also bound to do that. If all of us start working together, I believe that the scope of the citizen engagement will become more meaningful, will become more deepened, and will become wonderful results. Thank you.
I would like to add one more comment to it. See, I believe that in the last, especially 5 years, the public mood is changing. I think people's consciousness about climate has increased substantially. We keep on polling a lot of our employees. We keep on polling students, and we find that, you read every day's newspaper, what's happening in Himachal, what's happening here. There is nobody who is not aware of this. I think what needs to be done is we have to tell them what is the little bit that they can do that can make a difference. The 4 R's, like, how do you refuse, how do you reduce, how do you recycle, how do you reuse, and now you can add repair and rent. I think those are the things we have to tell people what little contribution they can make, because people do want to contribute. I think that realization that something needs to be done is extremely, extremely stark. So I think with that we are going to close. There is going to be a launch of of publication, our journey with the city, deciphering WRI-India Ross Center's influence in Bangalore. I'm going to request Radha Chanchani to come on the stage. Come, Radha.
The WRI-India Ross Center for Sustainable Cities has been engaged in Bangalore since 2010. Pursuing a long-term vision of sustainable development, we have worked with several partners and stakeholders to help this dynamic city address the challenges associated with its rapid growth. Starting with mobility and then moving more broadly to urban development, related services such as energy and water and climate resilience, we have worked across multiple sectors deploying a variety of strategies for influence and impact. This publication captures a decade of our growth, work, and outcomes and learnings for the organization, along with evaluating its role in advancing broader ecosystem change in the city. With an aim to understand the results of this deep engagement approach, and that's the aim of the publication, we do hope that this will be of interest to many readers. Thank you so much, and I would like to invite our co-authors, Jaya Dhindo and Madhav Pai, to launch the publication.